Many of you know that in January we began a visioning campaign for the church, a one-year-long campaign on our transformation, our transforming journey to talk about the future, but learn about the future, learn about each other, and see where the church is going. So today is our second in the series of sermons, of messages, and our scriptural theme is Micah 6:8, which many of us know very well. What does the Lord require of you but to do justice, to love kindness, and walk humbly with your God? This morning, Mary Lou Hatcher is going to share her message on Hold On to Hope, Lobbying for Peace and Justice. Mary Lou is going to share some fabulous information with us. And sometimes we have felt over the past years, many years, some of us, why are we doing this kind of work? Well, we're doing this kind of work because it's something that we're called to do. It's prophetic work that we're called to do. We also do this. Mary Lou shared this wonderful information in another meeting. She said, we do this work for policymakers to have support and voice. We do this because we are a democracy and have a civic responsibility to engage. We do this as people of faith, and we have a moral obligation. It's our prophetic responsibility to deal with people in need. So I'd like to tell you a little bit about Mary Lou, who happens to be a very good friend of Nancy Shangala. We're grateful that you're here. Mary Lou is visiting from Massachusetts, right? New Hampshire. Oh, New Hampshire. I was close, not close enough. But she's also the chairperson for the Friends Committee on National Legislation, or FCNL, which you'll hear referred to this morning. FCNL is a national, nonpartisan Quaker organization that lobbies Congress and the administration to advance peace, justice, and environmental stewardship. So Mary Lou's going to share her thoughts on the scripture, as well as present some stories, personal stories, about the importance of advocating and legislation, and offer us guidelines on how to do it. Mary Lou?
I seem to be accumulating more and more props as the morning goes along. I'm so grateful for the welcome that I've already had here today, especially from Byron and Rick and the tech support, because it's always a little bit iffy how it's all going to connect, and also for the beautiful music. And I was very inspired by this hymn that was chosen as your opening hymn, I'm the light of the world. I practice as a Quaker, and you may know that Friends often refer to divinity, to Christ, as light. May I hold you in the light. May you be held in the light. I am the light of the world. You people come and follow me. If you follow with love, you'll learn the mystery of what you were meant to do and to be. And this verse that we sang, to free the prisoner from all chains, to make the powerful care, to rebuild the nations with strength and goodwill, to see all of God's children everywhere. That's a very Quakerly hymn. So hello, friends. I'm pleased to be here as a friend. First, as a friend of Nancy, who has been more than a friend but a soulmate since the early 1980s, when we met as young women, both in our first big church-related jobs, exploring work and family and faith ever since. It's been a lovely journey to take with her. I'm also a friend with a capital F from a sister faith community, the Quakers, and we call ourselves Friends. The official name of the congregation is the Religious Society of the Friends of Truth, so it's good to just shorten it to Friends. And I also am here to specifically represent and offer some thoughts and resources from the Friends Committee on National Legislation. And I feel befriended by Micah, that very often quoted prophet, and by so many prophets through the ages, whose friendship has asked me to look at power and to look at love and to find some ways to live with those two realities side by side. So this morning I'll touch on a couple of questions. One, why be involved with government? Another, does legislative advocacy work? Can it ever be effective? And if so, what kind of engagement can be most effective, and what are some of the tools for that work? And I'll share some helps, hopefully from the FCNL website. We'll get that all connected. So why be involved in government is a good question, because governance, especially at the federal level in such an enormous nation as ours, is an extremely conservative and slow-moving organization. It was designed to be that way. And particularly in this age of polarization, it seems sometimes to come to a complete halt. So there can be some despairing moments in thinking about our nation and making progress. The most secular answer I can think of is, we are a democracy in continual formation, and we have a civic duty to be part of that process as citizens of this country. From the time of our independence from Britain, we have struggled to be a more perfect union. We are a nation formed on high ideals that have forever been compromised by a deep history of enslavement and protected wealth. From the beginning, that influenced our governance structures at all levels. And we are still grappling with fair access to voting, a fair distribution of our nation's resources, and a public discourse that prioritizes common good over partisan issues. So it's all very relevant and all very current and all very rooted in history. I've recently finished reading the New York Times text they produced out of their 1619 project, and I really recommend it to you as a resource in looking at the ways that enslavement shaped and continues to shape us as a nation. And I also would recommend Howard Zinn's well-known text, A People's History of the United States, a good resource for thinking about power and history and all the many peoples who have crossed paths in this nation. From a faith perspective, I would share a bit from Quaker history, starting from something I'm grateful to have learned actually from my upbringing in the United Methodist Church, which is the acronym BERT, B-E-R-T, BERT, the Bible, Experience, Reason, and Tradition. 4 sources from which we come to know about God, what and who God is, and God's impact on our life. The Bible, our experience, reason, and tradition, all good sources. And for various religious traditions, one of them might rise to the top as primary. For our Roman Catholic brothers and sisters, perhaps tradition. For the Protestants, as a general, perhaps the Bible, the primary resource. For Quakers, it has always been personal experience and prayer. That means that for us, there is an inner experience of divinity, which offers the most assured guidance and touchstone for our lives. Friends have called this the inner teacher, the Christ within, the light. And therefore, because there is that light within and we so deeply hold it, everyone is to be treated as a bearer of that light. John Woolman was a 17th century, I believe, 18th century friend who did a lot of walking amongst native peoples. And he said he wanted to be with them to share what light he had found and to see what light they had found, which is very different than being amongst native peoples to civilize them into some other way of being and knowing, right? So there is that of God in everyone, which is a catchphrase that friends use, and it may be familiar to you. From the beginning in the mid-1600s, Quakers were led to testimonies of equality and peace because of this fundamental belief. You may have heard that some Quakers went to prison because of their refusal to engage in hat honor. So hat honor was when one of your betters came before you on the road, you doffed your hat to your better. And Quakers said, we're not betters. There are no betters. And they refused to take their hats off to their superiors. And so they landed up in jail for that, actually, for not refusing to tip their hat. But this also led to, in many ways, some more serious things, such as the championing of women as leaders in the church and in the community, in the strong fight for the abolition of slavery, and for a deep commitment to nonviolence and non-harm. And the Quakers are understood to be one of the historic peace churches. So that primary orientation of relying on prayer and guidance from within is a first step, and of course, always assisted in friendship with sacred texts and the living community of friends themselves. But I'll go back to our first question on governance now. I think it's important to get that base of where are we coming from in this question. The idea of governance based on a radical democracy is a deeply felt expression for friends. Inclusion, nonviolence, and equity, all guiding principles. And I heard so much of that this morning in your prayers as well. So we understand, friends understand they're not alone in these quests. But in that context, I want to get back and introduce you a little bit to Friends Committee on National Legislation. It is a 80-year-old, nonpartisan, grassroots lobby based in Washington, D.C., with advocacy teams across the country. Began in 1943 when a group of 50-some friends in Richmond, Indiana gathered to share a concern about 1943, whether friends might possibly influence public policy on issues of war and peace. Talk about a tough task at that time. Today, we work for a broad spectrum of concerns: a world free of war and the threat of war, a society with justice and liberty for all, communities where all persons can reach full potential, and an earth restored. We have about 60 staff in Washington on Capitol Hill, some of whom are registered lobbyists, and others who do outreach and research. We have 3 properties on Capitol Hill: offices, a welcome center, and a guest house conference center where folks can come, stay, learn about lobbying, and lobby on issues they care about. And we have an organizational commitment to a diverse staff and to young adults, both in staff and in advocacy. And for the past 5 years, we've been working really hard to engage more people of color in our staff and to do a big outreach to young adult leadership and to be led by those communities. And a commitment to grassroots advocacy means at this point about 350 advocacy teams in various parts of the country. There are quite a few in the Philadelphia area that build relationships with their members of Congress and the staffs of those persons. So I want to tell you how I got involved with FCNL, and I'll tell you a little bit about how they work. Maybe 12 years ago, a young program assistant from the staff called our Quaker meeting and said, "We are working on trying to eliminate cluster munitions, and we have identified Senator Specter, who was then a senator for Pennsylvania, as one of the swing votes on this issue. And we want to come to talk to your meeting about why this is important and ask you, as a meeting, to go to his office in Allentown and ask him to support this legislation to eliminate cluster munitions." And I thought, well, that's amazing. And that all happened. He came, he spoke knowledgeably, he convinced a lot of people. We had our first lobby visit and met with the staff of Senator Specter's office. And I thought, sign me up. Who are these people? They have got a very specific and very strategic plan They have identified a piece of legislation that is liable to pass. They have the names of the swing vote senators, and they are asking people in those districts to lobby on this particular and try to get this legislation through. Now, as an aside, you may know and have read over the weekend that the Biden administration has just agreed to send cluster munitions to the Ukraine. They are a very dangerous, very civilian targeting kind of munition, and it's with sadness that we see this happen. Many European nations have banned these kinds of munitions, but the United States has not, Russia has not, the Ukraine has not. So a bit about, does it work? Does it work? Well, sometimes. Raymond Wilson was the first General Secretary of FCNL, and he said, "We've got to be willing to work for causes which cannot be won in the future unless the goals are set out today." So we're still working on cluster munitions, but I find it interesting that when that issue was raised a decade ago, there was no public discourse about it, and today it's on the front page of the news. So the idea that there might be some kind of munitions that we stockpile that we should not be using is at least part of our conversation. But here are a couple of stories. When the United States was contemplating a deal with the nation of Iran, a nuclear deal to limit their acquiring and use of nuclear weapons, FCNL strongly supported this issue, convinced that nuclear sites could be monitored well and that reducing nuclear weapons in the Middle East was actually a really good idea. I lived in Pennsylvania then, and Senator Casey, again, was a swing vote on this issue. He was being lobbied very strongly by the Jewish community because they really feared any kind of negotiation with Iran as a premise. So he was getting phone calls 2-to-1 to say, do not do this deal, do not negotiate with Iran. And Quakers affiliated with FCNL, many of our allies across the state, mobilized call-ins to Senator Casey's office. And we brought those calls back to 1-to-1 so that he could see that there were constituents that in fact really wanted these negotiations to go forward. And then that year in November, at our annual meeting in DC, we focused on the Iran nuclear deal and gathered some nuclear arms experts with us, and about 50 friends from Pennsylvania met with Senator Casey's then Chief of Foreign Relations staff to speak with her about what language could go into this bill that would make it possible for Senator Casey to move forward with it. In the end, he agreed to sign the nuclear deal, and he felt so strongly about it that he wrote, usually staff writes a senator's response, he wrote his own response to why he had voted for this deal. It was 17 pages of single-spaced text. So I share that to say, it's easy to say they're all just run by money, they don't really care, as an example of a senator who really cared deeply about will my vote promote peace or inhibit peace, and really was very engaged in it. And the point is that consistent engagement can give lawmakers the backing that they need to follow their own conscience, and importantly in this era, to make decisions outside of the party lines, which representatives are very reluctant to do. Another story on a somewhat smaller scale, but with enormous impact as well. There's an FCNL person like myself, just a volunteer, living in Alaska, part of the advocacy group, who had a long-term relationship with Senator Murkowski there, as you may know, is a Republican senator, long seated in the state of Alaska, has not many things that she agrees with in the FCNL agenda of policies, not in the environment, not on immigration, not on energy, not on a lot of things. But David kept in relationship with her and her staff, always polite, always courteous, regular visits, here's what we're still working on, thank you, Senator, for working so hard. very respectful, long-term relationship. So the Affordable Care Act under the Obama administration, you may know it as Obamacare, is up for passing. Another swing vote, Senator Murkowski. So FCNL flew David to Washington, D.C. on the 2 days before the vote. And because this constituent from her hometown was there, and because he was in D.C. and had come to D.C. to meet with her, he actually got a meeting with the senator herself, which is a very hard thing to do. You meet mostly with senator staffs. You don't usually meet with senators. And he took with him into that visit FCNL staff who had been researching what are all the ways this legislation will impact the people of Alaska. So they could go in with all that data, and they could say, just look at the data. See how the state of Alaska people are going to be affected by this healthcare program. And she ended up voting for the package. So behind the scenes, one phone call, one email, lots of phone calls, lots of visits. Which leads to the next piece, what kind of engagement matters? And the answer to that is it all matters. The emails matter, the calls matter, the letter to the editors matter, the visits matter. They all matter. And with that, I'm going to try to share my screen. Now, this might take a second, so thank you for your patience. You can be thinking about your questions and what of what you've just heard kind of has weight and feels powerful to you. Just have a moment of quiet to reflect on that while we do this tech stuff. I think standing in line at the grocery store or waiting for the technology to connect are these wonderful contemplative moments to think, that was a lot of information. What struck out to me in that information? You know, where do I move forward? What matters to me? Where am I in this story? Having said that, maybe I shouldn't say anything else, and you should just have your own quiet, lovely thoughts, but I'll try this. Yeah, I don't know where I am. So we just go here.
Yep.
And then how do I get it? Oh, share.
Up on the.
And then I want to go here. Yay! So this is the FCNL website. It's fcnl.org. And I just want to walk you through a few things that might be useful to you in whatever kind of political advocacy you find yourself doing. First of all, you might notice this wonderful picture of John Lewis. I want to show you our staff. We've made a commitment to diversifying our staff, and I want to ask you, as we see these pictures, if you would just hold these folks in the light. You and I can decide, I'm not reading the newspaper today. I'm not turning on the TV. I've had too much. But these folks have to look at it every day. It's their job. Oh, great. Thank you, Nancy. I'd like to invite you to notice how diverse and how young this staff is. This is our commitment to the future, to new leaders. And also to be informed as we try to figure out what is the best policy moving forward, that we're informed by voices that come from the frontline communities most impacted by those policy decisions. I mentioned John Woolman's interactions with Native Americans, but Friends were also very involved with Indian boarding schools in the in that era. And if we had had more Native peoples in our communities thinking about what would be helpful to those communities, don't think we'd have come to those kinds of conclusions. So these are our staff, and thank you for holding them in light and love for the hard work they do every day, confronting war and poverty and injustice. These are the issues you can see listed in that scroll down of things that we work on currently. It's a pretty big darn agenda. It can be kind of overwhelming. But I wanted to just highlight this because I know it's something this congregation is concerned about, gun violence prevention. So if you were on our website and you wanted to just see what's FCNL doing on gun violence prevention, what can be done at the federal level, you could go down to this place and see a way to take action right here immediately, sending an email to your legislators right away, but also some writing around things that we're doing. And we're calling it gun violence prevention because a lot of this happens at a state and local level. But at the federal level, we're trying to find funding for to go to communities to have folks engaged in conflict resolution and de-escalation before we get to the kinds of fatal incidents that happen. So gun violence prevention. But I want to spend most of our time here in this action center. So ACT, there it is. The little things, this says ACT. I have to better watch. First of all, I just want to show you what the Lobby Congress piece has. There she is. Here, you can find out clues in meeting with Congress, how to have a good lobby visit, how to write an effective email, how to write an effective letter to the editor, and if you want to join an advocacy team, how you do that. So if you want to write a letter to the editor, say, you can click on that and you can go right here and say, get started. And it gives you writing tips, and it gives you a way to submit that letter to the editor to FCNL if you would want to, so that they can maybe follow up and give a little weight to what you've written. It's all about compounding the contacts. But writing tips. One that I always found particularly useful is if you write a letter to the editor, put your congressman's name in the letter to the editor. And that way their staff are sure to notice it and clip it for the member of Congress to read. Oops. But I wanted to, that's okay. Don't panic. I think this might be in the email one. So this is the same, how to do an effective email, and tips for writing an email, and the email strategy. And Alicia McBride is one of our staffers who works with advocates across the country, and she says this about the simple thing of writing an email. You know, I mean, I've heard so many people say, well, does it really matter? Do they really read these emails? Do they really count the emails? Yes, they do. So, as time allows, I do respond when an organization I support and trust asks me to email Congress. As far as FCNL's requests are concerned, I can tell you that we ask for action when we believe you can make a difference based on the information our lobbyists gain from daily meetings on Capitol Hill. To me, whether to email Congress works is a matter of perspective. My email is like one tile in a mosaic. I cannot see the picture up close, but without my tile in the right place, along with many other tiles of many other colors and natures, the picture will not be the same. Trying to keep that longer view helps me approach those emails that pop up in my box, not as an obligation or a distraction, but as an opportunity. So I'm still here under Act, and now I'm going to take us to Take Action. You see this, it says, "Hi, Nancy." That's because I joined Nancy earlier so that we could pull up your representatives when we go in here. So she's logged in here. So this computer thinks I'm Nancy at the moment. Under this Action Center are my officials, my legislators. Because it's Nancy logged in, here are Nancy's legislators. So here are senators and representatives, but also state reps. So this is pretty useful. A lot of this stuff and a lot of this gun stuff happens at state level, so there you go. And then, right down here at the bottom, the local police chief. So if we're talking about gun violence, we want to have conversations around this, let's engage law enforcement in how exactly they are enforcing law, and how do they show up when there's a person with mental illness that they may be confronting. Are they trained to do this kind of thing? Are they ready? Are they prepared? So that's pretty useful. Who are all your legislators at all levels? And also there, at the federal level, is a staff lookup. So when you're trying to contact your member of Congress, and I'll just type in Casey, here are staff contacts for Senator Casey. So the scheduler is this important person, Ian. He's the person who schedules all the visits for the senator in DC. But also here, on gun issues, is Adam Fontaine. So you could go on here and you could say, oh, I see. So the person in the senator's office, and this eliminates so many phone calls to their voicemails to say, who should I talk to, and what's the person's name, and how do I reach them? You can find out who you need to reach right away. So you want to talk to Adam about gun issues, and you want to contact the scheduler, Ian. And you say, Ian, we have 5 people here from our church. We've been working on gun issues. We want to talk to you about it. We are showing up in Washington, D.C. We'll be here these couple of days. We're going to stay at the Friends Guest House, and we would like a meeting with Adam. So we can let Senator Casey know how very much we want him to be more assertive on this issue. So that's useful information. So that's under my officials, staff. Legislation is where you can find out how your folks have voted on issues that, mostly it's on issues FCNL lobbies on. But as you saw from that list, that's a lot of things. If you go back to the Action Center, we actually have a write-up here on build safer communities by investing in violence interrupters. So that's the funding we're trying to get at the federal level for building capacity in local communities. So if you go on that, you see that my computer thinks this is Nancy. So it has already given me Casey, Fitzpatrick, and Fetterman to write my email. They have given me a sample email to each one, which I can also edit. So you see with the cursors here, I can also edit this and say, last week at my church, 50 of us had this program, and we would like to state this opinion. And these are the incidents that happen in my community. And here's somebody that I know that's been impacted by gun violence, and here's why I care about it. So you can personalize this letter. But if you don't have time to do that, you can just send it as it is, and it'll get counted. You can also just write your own letter from the word go. Right here, write your own letter. There are your senators. If you just are writing to a representative, you can get the senators off there and just write Representative Fitzpatrick, and it'll change that for you. You write your text in here and you just click send. So on any issue, you don't have to be involved in FCNL. You don't have to be lobbying on the issues that we care about. You can just come in, write your own email on an issue that you care about, and send it. And it's all right there. So that's, let's go back to, that's the Action Center. Oops, that Action Center is right on the home page. We'll go back to where we started. I'm sure I could do this easier, but here we go. Oh, it's going to make me go all the way back. Here's the home page. And here's the Acting Center, ACT, right here. Okay. Thank you for your patience with all of that. You just pause, you're praying for me, right? You're holding me in the light. I figure out where I am. So, it all matters. Every big thing you do and every small thing you do, thank you for all the work that you've already done. I know that you are a very busy congregation thinking and planning on all these things. So thank you for your journey. Thank you for your part to the history. Thank you for giving me a chance to share a bit about a place and an organization that I care deeply about and commit a lot of time to. I would just close by saying that it can seem hard to be hopeful in this day and age, especially about our federal government. I have come to think of hope as synonymous with commitment. If I'm still committed, then I'm still hopeful. Many days I'm not optimistic. I don't think the data points to a good outcome. But I continue to be committed. I continue to be hopeful. And part of the hope is, of course, connecting with so many other hope-filled persons. Amen.